G'day, I'm Mark Hoth and welcome to Swift Almanac. In this lesson we're going to look at how segues operate within a navigation controller. You may recall that navigation controllers maintain a stack of view controllers, with the top of the stack being the active view controller. Now this presents the issue of how do we pass data to upcoming view controllers when they don't exist, which we might want to do for an edit, and how do we get information back to a view controller when we are going backwards through our stack, say in the case of a new record or an edited record that we want to save. The answer is segues. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you the basics of segues in the storyboard and in the final lecture of this series. I'm going to do everything in code with a collection view controller that will wrap up nicely as we go into the core data series. So, segues. Okay, so we need Xcode and we need a new project. It'll be a single view application and we'll call it Segues. We'll save it on the desktop. And we're going into the storyboard. And in fact, we'll keep that view controller and we will need a table view controller. And we want that to be the first thing. And then we want to embed a navigation controller for our table view. And for our prototype cell, we just want a label. And let's give it some constraints. So that's looking good. We'll get rid of our launch screen. Now for our view controller, we also want a label. We'll give that some constraints. And our view controller code we're going to call my view controller. We'll create a group, and so we need a couple of extra files. We need a table view controller, we'll call that my table view controller, and we need an associated cell for the table view. So table view cell, we'll call that my table view cell. And let's put that in the view controllers. Then we'll go back to the storyboard and we'll set up our outlets. Firstly, we need to set the class my table view controller. And for the cell, and the cell also needs a reuse identifier, which we will have as my cell. And we've got our label, we didn't center it, but we'll center it now. And then we need to put that in my table view cell. So that outlet is just going to allow us to display some information. We'll call it cell label. We'll call it my cell label. That's fine, and then on the other side we'll also center that, and that needs to go to my view controller. Maybe did I set that up? I did not. Okay, so now it's going to my ViewController, and we'll call this my cell label as well. So if we go to my table view controller, the number of sections, well, there's one section, and we need some data. So let's do what we did last time, and we'll create a variable called an array, which is an array of strings, and we'll set that equal to my phone going off in the background there. Okay, so we're back here. We've got our table view, we've got our array, which needs to terminate correctly. So the number of rows is equal to our array.count. And we have this function here, which allows us to use our reuse identifier. So let k reuse equal my cell. And quite simply, what we want to do is we want to set this my cell label equal to array label.text equal to the array index path dot row. So that should put this text value into our array, and let's go back to our storyboard. Probably want to set the title. And let's run this and see how we go. As my table view cell, let's type curse that. My cell label, what did I call it here? Maybe we need to put cell. Okay. Ooh. Okay, there you go. So we've got cell 1 through 8. That took forever. Anyway, we've got our cells here 1 through 8, and essentially what we want to do in order to edit these, normally what you would do, or to get more information about whatever the content of this cell is, you double click on it. So, and to do that, we need to create a segue into the other view controller. And if we look at the errors that we've got, we see here my view controller is unreachable. So what we want to do is, so we can see everything, is we just control drag from the cell to this other view controller, and we want to make this a show segue. Did I say Segue before? I always say Segue. Anyway, we'll make it a show segue, and this here is the segue, and you see it's got an identifier, and we're just going to call that identifier edit. And look, I suppose while we're here, we'll create a button, a bar button, and we'll make that an add button, and then we'll also do a segue from the bar button to the view controller, and we'll do that as a show as well. And that one's called edit, and we're going to call that one add. So now we've got two different ways of getting to the view controller, and what we want to do is we want to get this label text into the view controller based on what cell we clicked on. So we don't need to do anything with these two segues, but this bar button, we better do something with that. So we'll go to Assistant Editor, and create an action for the bar button. So call that the add action. Okay, I might as well fix up these two things while we're there, just because I hate getting these errors. Okay, so we got rid of all our auto layout errors. So we go back to our table view controller. Now, in our view controller, we have this label, but we need to create a variable. We just call it cell string, cell label. Which is going to be a string. And in view.did_load, we just want to set my cell label.text equal to cell label, and we'll have a default initializer of 0 for the string. Now look, sometimes people put this as an optional, but I hate optionals. It's saying that it hasn't been done, which is what an optional says, that a value hasn't been set, or it's going to be set later, is really just, you've still got to test for it. So I prefer just to do the initialization at the start and get it all out of the way. So, and then it's all clear. You don't need to worry about when it gets set somewhere in the code. So really, I only use optionals when the system is returning the optional value, and then I try and get rid of the optionality as fast as possible. Okay, so if we go back to the table view controller, there is a function called prepare, and we receive a segue, and the center is any, so that's all fine. And what we need to do is we use the segue and the view controller to figure out which segue it is, and we use that from the name that we had. So we'll have k add segue equals add, and we'll have let k edit segue equals edit. And what we need to know is we need to know which cell is the cell that's being clicked on, because we need to get the data out of that cell. And there's a function index path for selected row, what's property. And we also need to know what the where we're going. And the Segue has a what's called the destination view controller, which is where we're headed to. So destination gives us our view controller. Now we've got two different segues, and one's for add and one's for edit, and we're not quite sure which one's which, so we need a couple of if statements here. So we go if segue.identifier equals k add segue, then we're going to add and else we're going to edit a record. So, and this is how we pass the data. We go, well, we need to typecast it as my view controller, and then our destination VC is going to have this cell label string. So if it's an add, we're just going to set it equal to nothing, and if it's an edit, then we want to set it equal to our array index path dot row. So that's just going to pass the string out of our array, depending on which one we've clicked on. We're there this time. Love the syntax of Swift. Okay, so now if we click on this, it comes over and gives us cell 5, and we'll go back and that's fine. Cell 2, if you click on plus, we get no cells because we've left it blank. So that's working as we liked. Now, I'm not actually going to do an edit, but just so I can show you how the reverse works, what I'm going to do is when I pass this value, I'm going to, before I do that, you might be thinking, why create this variable at all when you've got a label right here which you could fill in and give a value to. So let's see what happens if we go destvc dot my cell label dot text equals array. Oops. I'll just get rid of that. It's not needed. And run that. So this is in the edit segue. Oh, and we get a crash. Fatal error, unexpectedly found nil while unwrapping an optional value. And the reason we get this is that when prepare is called in our view controller, this outlet hasn't been set up yet, and so it crashes. So this is why we need to have these properties, and then in viewDidLoad we need, once viewDidLoad's called, we know that these outlets are now in existence, and so we can set the value. So almost guaranteed that you're going to get trapped by that at some stage, probably more than once. So the second thing I wanted to show you is what happens when you come backwards, and I don't really want to do an edit because I don't want to do text edits, I haven't done them before with you. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to set the array value to be nil or empty, or an empty string. So array for that index path is equal to nothing, and okay, so we've got cell 5, and even though we set the array hasn't refreshed, so we need to do a refresh. So we do that by just going table view dot reload data. And you can see cell 5's disappeared. Now you wouldn't do this if you're really editing area or delete the cell, but what I want to show you is how we get the data back from the view controller, from my view controller back to my table view controller. And actually, before we do that, I am going to make this code a lot more nicer. So it really should say else if segue dot identifier equals k edit segue, do this, else print something's wrong. Okay, because we might edit these segues or remove them altogether or change them or whatever, and so we really should have a default being edit, because we might not be able to edit that cell. The other thing is that if you're using storyboards, then you've got this segue identifier, edit, and add. In fact, we've got all these identifiers with cells. On the cell, no. With cells, where you've got these identifiers, and these are just massive traps for bugs. One of the advantages of source code over using the storyboard is that you can have these constants declared, which, when referred to, cover you for all instances. So if we were to change this to add segue, but we don't change it in the storyboard, then we're stuffed. But if we're doing everything in code, then the segue will have that name automatically, because we'll be using this constant. So one of the advantages of doing everything in code is that you can use constants and not get those kind of errors. Of course, you can set up with TDD, test-driven development, you can set up tests to make sure that they all match. And that's what you should do if you are using a storyboard. And while we're on that topic of using storyboards or using things in code, one of the other advantages of doing everything in code is only one person can use the storyboard at once. And so if you've got more than one developer and you're working on different views and the like, then one of the advantages is in code you can just happily go along your way and do stuff. Otherwise, storyboards create problems with multiple developers. Okay, so when we click on this cell list and we're going backwards, how do we get the data from here back to here? Okay, so in order to get the data back, we need to do the following. We need to unwind from where we are, and just the general rule is we need to create an IB action, just a function, and we'll call it unwind to table view, and the parameter for that is going to be a storyboard. And it looks like that. And then what we need to do, because we're doing this in the actual storyboard, is we need to go from the view from our label. So we've created, let's have a look at this. So in the table view, we've created the unwind function, but it's in the view controller that we're trying to get out of. That's where we're going to unwind to. So in the view controller, we control drag to exit, and then our segue is going to unwind to table view, is going to be there. Now, the next problem we have is that we're using this automatic navbar item, and we can't attach anything to this item. So we need to go into my ViewController, and there's a function called will disappear. View will disappear, and that is saying if our tab controller is disappearing, then what we want to call is the segue that we've just created. So we want to perform segue with identifier, and the sender is self, and so we need to create this identifier, which for us is going to be Unwind. And then if we go back into the main storyboard, we've got this unwind segue that's been created over here, and we need to add unwind to table view. So we've got the identifier there. Then in our table view controller, okay, we need to have the exact, okay, well, you're going to copy that unwind to table. Okay, so we've got that now correct. So we're now calling this unwind to table view function when we leave. So we'll go print unwind. Okay, so it's printed the unwind statement. So we know this is being called, but it's still not filling in our cell. So there's a couple of things we need to do. Firstly, we don't know what this cell is when we get back. So when we're editing, we need to create another property called select cell, which is an integer, and we'll give it a value of 0 as default. Now, if we're adding, there's no cell, so the selected cell is still going to stay as it was. But down here, selected cell is going to be equal to this index path.row bang, etc. So when we get back, we'll be able to use selected cell, but we need to get the actual data. So just like we did here with this destination, right, we'll go let source VC equal segue dot I think it's dot source as my view controller, and then we're going to have, no we're not, we're going to have unwind, that's it, unwind segue.source as my view controller. And then we can just check that cell label. So if source vc.cell label, if that is equal to, oh well, if it doesn't equal nothing, then we want to enter the information back into the array. So array dot, sorry, not dot, selected cell is going to be equal to source vc dot cell label, and then we just need to update the table again, table view dot reload data, and that should put the value back into the selected cell and reload it so it's displayed, and we'll run that. And that's now working correctly. So that's how showing you how to, in summary, showing you how to move data from a table view into a single view, and you could potentially edit that information, then send it back. The unwind functionality is a little bit clunky, especially because we're using the standard navigation backbar button here. Normally we would get rid of that and we'd use our own button, and that's what we'll be doing in the collection view version later on. So if you are after the source code for this, it will be uploaded, and it will be at that URL, and you can play with it. And of course, even though we pass an array or just a single string here, you can pass multiple values or a structure, etc., in order to move everything from one view or table view to another. Well, that's Segues in a nutshell, data forward and back. My next tutorial is going to be auto layout in code, followed by collection view segues in code, so stay tuned for those. If you have any questions about this tutorial, then please leave a comment below or hit me up on Twitter at @SwiftAlmanac. Please subscribe to the channel, it's free, and check out our website at www.swiftalmanac.com. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Cheers.